The morning Daniel Hargrove discovered his father's watch was gone, the sky outside was the color of a bruise, purple and yellow and sick with light, the kind of morning that seems to know something you don't. He stood in the doorway of his father's old study, a room he had barely touched since the funeral, and stared at the empty velvet cushion inside the open glass case on the desk. The indentation was still there. The ghost of the watch remained. But the watch itself, the 1953 Patek Philippe Calatrava that his father, Raymond Hargrove, had worn every single day for 41 years, was gone. Daniel was 53 years old, a retired civil engineer with wide, careful hands and a habit of measuring things twice. He was not a man given to panic. He had stood at the edge of flooded bridges, filed insurance claims on washed-out roads, delivered a eulogy for his father without once breaking his voice. But standing in that quiet study, looking at that empty velvet hollow, something cracked open in him that no amount of composure could seal shut. He walked through the house slowly, the way a man walks when he already suspects the answer and is only gathering courage to confirm it. His son Marcus had been staying with them, Marcus and his wife, Celeste. They'd arrived 3 weeks ago with 2 overpacked suitcases and an explanation that felt, even then, a little too rehearsed. Financial trouble. A lease that fell through. Just a few weeks, Dad, Marcus had said, just until we get back on our feet. Daniel had said yes, of course he had. Marcus was his only child. But Marcus and Celeste were gone now too. Their suitcases, their toiletries, the strange artificial orchid Celeste kept on her nightstand, all of it gone. The guest room was stripped back to its bones, the bed neatly made the way people make beds when they don't want you to think they left in a hurry, though they very much did. Daniel sat down at the kitchen table and called his son's number. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Same result. He set the phone on the table and looked at it for a long moment, then he got up, made coffee, and sat back down. He was a man who understood structure, load-bearing walls, tensile strength, the mathematics of how much pressure a thing can hold before it gives. He understood that what he was feeling right now was grief trying to disguise itself as anger, and that he needed to let the two of them sort themselves out before he did anything irreversible. He thought about the watch. Raymond Hargrove had bought it in 1961, 8 years after it was manufactured, from a jeweler in Cincinnati who was closing his shop. He had paid $240 for it, more than a month's wages at the time, because he believed in buying things that lasted. He had worn it to his wedding. He had worn it when Daniel was born. He wore it to job interviews and funerals and ordinary Tuesdays with equal gravity, because Raymond believed that how you treated ordinary time said more about a man than how he behaved in the extraordinary moments. When Raymond died 2 years ago, he left no formal will. He had told Daniel privately, during one of those long hospital afternoons when the two of them sat together watching the parking lot fill and empty, that the watch was to be Daniel's. Not to sell, Raymond had said, quietly but with the kind of firmness that didn't invite negotiation. Not to give away, just to have, just to carry. He'd squeezed Daniel's wrist where a watch would sit. A man should know what time costs. A man should know what time costs. Daniel had kept it in the glass case in the study because he found he couldn't wear it yet. The weight of it on his wrist felt like a conversation he wasn't ready to finish. He visited it sometimes in the mornings, the way you visit a photograph. He would open the case, look at it, and feel both the distance and the nearness of his father, the paradox of grief that never fully resolved. He had not told Marcus about the watch's value, not the financial value, which was considerable, but the other kind, the kind that has no unit of measurement. He had not told Marcus, but someone had found out. He drove to the pawn shops first. There were 4 within 20 miles, and he went to each one with a photograph on his phone, a close-up of the watch face he had taken last Christmas, the gold case bright under the study lamp, the Roman numerals sharp and clean. No one had seen it. He drove to the 2 antique dealers in town. Nothing. He sat in a parking lot outside a dollar store and called a watch collector he'd met once at an estate sale, a man named Grover Fitch who dealt in serious timepieces. Grover picked up on the second ring. Patek Calatrava 1953, Grover said after Daniel described it. Original bracelet, yes. Signed dial, yes. There was a pause of the kind that contains information. Someone called me about something like that 2 days ago. Woman's voice. Said she'd come into it recently. I told her I'd need provenance. She didn't call back. Daniel wrote down nothing because there was nothing to write. He thanked Grover and sat with the engine running. A woman's voice. Celeste. He had never quite known what to make of Celeste. She was pretty in a sharp-edged way, and she laughed at the right moments, and she always offered to help clear the table, but there was something behind her eyes when she looked around the house, a kind of inventory taking that he'd told himself was his imagination. He had wanted to like her. He had tried to like her, for Marcus's sake, and he thought he'd mostly succeeded. Now he sat in a parking lot and wondered whether the whole of their 3-week stay had been orchestrated around that watch. He drove home. He sat in his father's chair in the study. He picked up the velvet cushion and held it in his hands, feeling the compressed indentation where the watch had rested for 2 years. Outside the window, a pair of sparrows were fighting over something in the gutter. He watched them until they resolved whatever their dispute was and flew away in opposite directions. Then he called his son one more time. This time Marcus answered. The silence on the line was its own kind of answer. "Dad," Marcus said, and even in that single syllable Daniel could hear the layers, guilt and defensiveness, and something that might have been relief at being caught, the way people sometimes are. "Dad, listen." "Just tell me where it is," Daniel said. He kept his voice level. He had learned from Raymond that calm was not the same as indifference. Sometimes it was the most precise form of seriousness available. Another silence. Then Celeste sold it. "I didn't know she was going to. I knew things were bad, but I didn't tell her to." His voice cracked somewhere in the middle of that sentence and didn't fully recover. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know she'd taken it until after." Daniel closed his eyes. He believed his son. He wasn't sure that made it better. Where did she sell it? An auction house. Online, she found a listing service. I don't know the name, she handled all of it, a sound like hands moving over a face. She said it would cover what we owed. I found out this morning. We had a fight, a bad one. I don't know where we stand right now. Some losses arrive like storms. Others are quiet as a clock winding down. You don't hear the last tick until the silence that follows it. Daniel opened his eyes. "Find out the name of the auction house. Send it to me." He paused. "And Marcus, call me back, not about the watch, just call me back." He hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then he began to search. The auction house was called Meridian Fine Timepieces, based out of Philadelphia, running a specialized online sale that had closed the previous evening. Daniel found the listing in under an hour. There it was, photographed under professional lighting, his grandfather's watch staring back at him from a webpage like a face seen through glass. Sold. The final price was listed, $31,400. Sold to a buyer whose name, per Meridian's privacy policy, could not be disclosed. He called Meridian. He spoke to a coordinator named Helena, who was professional and sympathetic and thoroughly unable to help him. The sale was finalized. The buyer's information was confidential. She was sorry for his situation. She suggested he consult a lawyer regarding any claim of unauthorized sale, and she was sorry. And she was sorry again. And the conversation ended the way these conversations do, with the polite, implacable closure of an institution that has done nothing wrong by its own rules. Daniel sat with that for a while. $31,000. Celeste had not even known what she had. A 1953 Calatrava in that condition, original dial, original bracelet, papers still in the velvet fold of the case, was worth 2, perhaps 3 times that to the right collector. She had let it go for $31,000 and thought she'd been clever. He thought about his father's hands. Raymond had worked in a machine shop for 22 years, and his hands showed it, scarred at the knuckles, permanently calloused at the base of the fingers, with a faint chemical smell that soap never entirely removed. Those hands had wound that watch every morning. Those hands had lifted Daniel as a boy and built the back porch of the house Daniel now lived in and shaken the hands of men who didn't deserve the courtesy. Those hands were gone, and now the watch was gone too. And the money didn't matter. It genuinely did not. And that was the part that was hardest to explain to anyone who hadn't loved something the way Daniel had loved that watch. The call came 11 days later. Daniel had done nothing in those 11 days that could be described as decisive. He had contacted a lawyer who confirmed what he suspected. A civil claim was possible but uncertain, expensive, and slow. He had not spoken to Celeste. He had spoken to Marcus twice. Careful, quiet conversations that were really about something other than what they appeared to be about, the way all important conversations between fathers and sons tend to be. Marcus had moved into a friend's place in Columbus. He and Celeste were separated, though not yet, he said, officially anything. Daniel had also, during those 11 days, taken long walks in the evening. He'd found himself thinking about time, not in the philosophical sense, but in the specific, granular sense his father had meant. What it cost, what it purchased. He thought about the 11 years he'd worked a job he was indifferent to because it paid well, and the vacations he hadn't taken, and the Sundays he'd spent working when he might have sat in this study with his father and talked about whatever came to mind. Time. What it costs. The call came at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning from a number with a Pennsylvania area code. Daniel almost didn't answer. He answered. "Is this Daniel Hargrove?" A man's voice. Older, with the unhurried cadence of someone who has learned that rushing rarely improves outcomes. "Yes. My name is Arthur Pellman. I'm calling about a watch." Daniel sat down. "I'm listening." Arthur Pellman was 71 years old and had been collecting Patek Philippe watches for 38 years. He had purchased the Calatrava through Meridian's auction, and he'd known within 20 minutes of receiving it that something was off, not with the watch itself, which was in extraordinary condition and every bit as beautiful as advertised, but with the provenance. The documentation Celeste had provided was thin. The story she'd submitted through the auction house's seller portal, that she had inherited it from an uncle, had struck him as the kind of story that covers a gap rather than fills one. "I've been collecting long enough," Arthur said, "to know when an object doesn't want to be where it is." A pause. "I made some inquiries through the auction house. They wouldn't give me your information, but I have a contact at Meridian who told me off the record that there had been a call from a man in Ohio asking about this exact watch. I did some searching. It wasn't difficult. Your father was Raymond Hargrove." "Yes," Daniel said. His throat had done something strange. He waited for it to resolve. Raymond Hargrove of Millfield, Ohio. He was mentioned in a 2019 article in a regional magazine about working-class collectors. There was a photograph. Another pause. He was wearing this watch. The silence that followed was the kind that requires no filling. Daniel let it sit. Outside his window, the morning was ordinary, traffic sounds, a neighbor's lawn mower, the world conducting its business with no particular awareness that something extraordinary was happening in a study in Millfield, Ohio. "Mr. Pellman," Daniel finally said. "Arthur, please." "Arthur, what is it that you're calling to tell me?" He had not known until that moment how much of himself he had stored inside that object, and how much of it was still there, waiting to be reclaimed. Arthur Pellman's answer was this. He was calling to give the watch back, not to sell it back, to return it. He had paid $31,000 for it at auction, and he was prepared to absorb that loss, because he was a man of 71 who had more money than remaining years and had learned at some cost that there were things money was supposed to do that it frequently failed to do. He asked only that Daniel cover the cost of insured shipping, $42. "You don't have to," Daniel began. "I know," Arthur said. "That's rather the point." The watch arrived on a Thursday in a double-boxed package, wrapped in enough protective material to survive a minor catastrophe. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table, slowly. The way his father used to open things, taking care with the wrapping, not tearing. Inside the inner box was the watch, nestled in the same velvet fold Celeste had presumably taken it from, and a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. Every good thing deserves to find its way home. AP. Daniel held the watch in his hands for a long time. It was heavier than he remembered, or perhaps he was simply more present to the weight of it this time. The gold case was warm from wherever it had been, or maybe that was just his hands. The Roman numerals on the cream dial were precise and formal, the kind of type that doesn't rush. The second's hand made its quiet revolution. He held it to his ear, the way his father used to do when he was showing it to someone, and he listened to the tick, that small, steady, serious sound that Raymond Hargrove had listened to every day for 41 years. He put it on. It fit as though it had been waiting. He sat at the table and looked at it on his wrist for a while, at the way it sat there with that particular authority that well-made things have, that quality of being exactly what they are and nothing else. He thought about his father. He thought about Arthur Pellman, who had no reason to call and every reason not to and had called anyway. He thought about Marcus, who had failed him in a real way and whom he was going to have to find a way to understand, because that was also part of what Raymond had been trying to tell him when he pressed his thumb to his son's wrist in the hospital room. A man should know what time costs, not just the cost of losing it, the cost of spending it wrong, the cost of not spending it at all. He called Marcus that afternoon, not about the watch. He told Marcus that the watch had come back briefly and let him sit with that, and then he set it aside and asked Marcus how he was doing, really doing, and this time the conversation was different. This time Marcus talked, and Daniel listened in a way he hadn't listened in a long while, the way the watch listened, which is to say, steadily, without judgment, marking every second as equal to the one before. They talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, Marcus had agreed to come home for a weekend. Not to fix anything. Daniel was careful not to frame it that way, because some things don't get fixed, they only get held. But to sit in the house where Raymond had lived and Marcus had grown up and Daniel was still, stubbornly and gratefully, growing older. To sit in the study, maybe. To look at the watch in its case or on Daniel's wrist and feel the particular gravity of things that endure. He wrote Arthur Pellman a letter by hand, 3 pages on plain paper, because he couldn't find stationery that seemed appropriate and decided plain was better than wrong. He wrote about Raymond. He wrote about the machine shop and the back porch and the Cincinnati jeweler and the way Raymond had explained the watch to 8-year-old Daniel as something that tells you not just what time it is, but that time is worth telling. He wrote about the hospital room. He wrote about the empty velvet cushion and the bruise-colored sky and the long days between losing the watch and getting it back. He wrote about the $42 for shipping, which he had sent as a money order because he wanted the act of payment to feel physical, consequential. At the end of the letter he wrote, "My father believed that a good thing, made well and treated with respect, outlasts everything that tries to diminish it. I believe he was right. You proved it. Thank you for being the kind of man who answers that call." He mailed it that Thursday, the same afternoon he had put the watch on for the first time. Then he walked back from the mailbox in the low slant of the late daylight, the watch on his wrist, the seconds moving with their small and serious persistence, not racing, not dawdling, just steady, the way a good thing moves through the world. And he went inside and started to make dinner, and the house around him was quiet, and for the first time in 2 years, it was a quiet that felt complete.